Good afternoon. I'm Aisling Zaccarelli. I'm Assistant Director at the Matthews Center for Career Development, and I am the Science and Health Advisor. And today we are presenting the CV workshop with two of our esteemed faculty, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Susanna Vadhimar here in the biology department. I teach intro biostatistics, and plant adaptations, and I study the evolutionary ecology of plants.
Hi, my name is Debbie Thurtle-Schmidt, and I am also an assistant professor in the biology department and as well as in the genomics and bioinformatics. So I teach genomics, bioinformatics, biostatistics, as well as sometimes intro bio. And I'm really interested in how genes get turned on and off in your body.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to dive right in. And the first slide that we're going to talk about is what is a CV? It's a curriculum vitae, but basically what that means is it's a detailed summary of your academic background and experience. Typically, you guys as freshmen here at Davidson have to, you have the requirement for a resume. A resume is a typically one-page snapshot of your experiences. The CV is a longer resume. Think of it that way. It doesn't have a page limit, but typically at the undergraduate level, it's 2 to 3 pages in length. And it's really a way of creating a scholarly identity. CVs are typically used for applications for summer research experiences, perhaps working with a faculty member for an independent study or for research positions over the summer as well. So it really is a way to organize your experiences and your academic work to showcase your skills and abilities. With that, any further comments on? Okay, fantastic. So the first section should always be education. And just as it is on your resume, we like our Davidson education to be displayed in a certain way. For most people who are putting together CVs, you're in the sciences or STEM fields. And so you will typically have a Bachelor of Science there and then followed by your major. If you're double majoring, you would include that there too. If you have an official minor, you would add that as well. Now, it's important to note that there's the word expected in front of your graduation date. That's because a CV is a snapshot of your abilities to date. And so if things that have not yet happened, we would not include on a CV, or if things are expected to happen in the future, we want to make sure that we're clear about that. Since your graduation has not happened yet, we'll put that word expected. Now, with regards to GPA, we say to include it if it's above really 3.2, but I defer to my faculty here on that. But I think if it's above 3.2, it's fair game to include. Sometimes when you're applying for different opportunities, faculty and the experiences may say do not include GPA because they don't want to have that bias on your CV. So just be sure to follow directions on that. But if you are going to include it, make sure it's a strong GPA to include. Next up would be relevant coursework. This would be all of your science and math, and comp sci, physics, all of your kind of core courses that are integral to your major. And in the sciences, you want to put those on there. And what I advise students as I see them is, you want to kind of build up and think of it as a crescendo and start with your more basic courses going to your more sophisticated. It would be important to note lab work for any classes that involve a lab. Please do put that on your CV. And any classes that you're currently in, you'll want to denote that with a spring or fall, whatever semester you're currently in, because again, the CV is what you've already done. So if you're in the process of doing it, you want to be clear about that. Now, if you've done study abroad, which I know many science majors don't have the time to be able to fit that into their schedule, but if you have cleverly found the time or you've done it in the summer, you'll want to include that in your education section. Okay, and we have on Handshake under resources. If you go to resume, you will be able to see how study abroad should be presented on the CV. Additionally, if you're doing a thesis project or a senior capstone, that would also be included in the education section. And if you were a recipient of any scholarship or Fulbright finalist, for example, that would also be captured there on your resume under the education, on your CV under the education section.
Just one thing to include here is you are tailoring your CV to whatever you're applying to. So that is when you think about what relevant coursework, you really want it to be relevant for the experience that you're applying to and trying to show and tell that story right now. So it might not always be the same for every position that you're making a CV for, and that is something that you want to have in the back of your mind.
Excellent. And no course numbers with those courses, because outside of Davidson, they won't have any context for that information. So just the course names would be important.
I'll add one more thing before we move on.
Yes.
You can mention in a bullet point here that you did a thesis or a capstone project, but the section to elaborate on that is in the research section. And that's actually the next slide. So that can be our transition over. If you've done research, you can have an entire section of your CV that details your research experience. If you haven't done research, that is okay. Not everyone has the same sections on their CV as everybody else. The point of a CV is to customize it based on your own experience. So if you have done research, for each maybe institution or lab through which you've done research, you can list a few bits of information about that experience. And if you've done research in more than one place, you'll repeat that same format for each place where you did research. You want to start out with the title or description of your position. Maybe you got a DRI here at Davidson and you can write Davidson Research Initiative Scholar. Maybe you were in the RISE program here at Davidson. You can actually spell out what that means and label yourself as a scholar. Maybe you were hired as a research technician or you got a fellowship, whatever it would be, you can include the title at the very top of that section for that experience. So in this example here, this person was a Davidson Research Initiative Scholar. You definitely want to refer to whose lab you were in. So laboratory of Dr. Debbie Thurtle-Schmidt, for example, and then list the date range that you were in their lab. If you're in someone's lab for multiple semesters, you can span that whole entire time and you don't have to list individual semesters. Be sure to refer to them by their title, include the doctor in there, even if you refer to some of us by our first names. Underneath that, in very concise bullet points, you want to detail maybe the focal question you were asking, the methods, techniques, or software that were most relevant to your research. The key word that I hope you picked up on was the word concise. You should not have a bunch of sentences there. You don't need to go into the results of any of your research if you have results or if you don't. What they want to do is really see what you have experience doing. You might want to mention the model organism. You might want to mention the techniques that you used. If you ended up presenting at a conference or presenting here at the Vernon Miller Case Symposium, you can list that presentation experience as a bullet point under your research section. Ultimately, if you're applying somewhere and you're interviewing, you will have a chance to convey details about your research then, or your mentor will do that in a recommendation letter. So there's no need to put more information than you see in this example here, which mostly focuses on your skill set and what areas of biology or science you are familiar with. Do you all have anything to add to this point?
Yeah, one thing I want to make a note is that you likely have a lot of experience from, for example, your upper division courses at Davidson College in the biology department. So if you have a primary research experience in one of those courses, that can go on here too, because that is still primary research, even if it wasn't during the summer or through kind of this independent study mechanism. And so if it's something that you feel that you have command about and that you would be comfortable if someone asked you any follow-up questions about or asked you to talk about it, then that is worth putting on your CV under a research experience. So for example, this is something I tell people, my students in my lab methods and genomics class, because you are doing primary research in that class. So I tell them that is something that can go on your CV and you can talk about it. The thing that kind of the bar that you want to be aware of basically is if it's on your CV, it's fair game for someone to ask you about. So you need to feel comfortable talking about it.
Yep. And research is like a magnet, and that if you are seeking a research position, your CV and resume needs to have research on it. So if you work with what you have, and if you are just want to underscore Dr. Thurtle-Schmidt's point about if you're doing primary research in a course, that is appropriate to include, because you want to play up the skills that you have. Okay. All right. next section.
So for many times for CVs, you are looking at these different health careers. And so you might have clinical experience, for example, also on your CV. And this is distinct from research experience. So these are more positions and usually full-time or extended positions, for example, part-time during the school year, of you interacting in a clinic with patients somehow. So these are different, and we're going to talk about shadowing experiences later in the next slide, actually. But this is more what about different experiences that you have had to prepare you for that have worked in a clinic. And a lot of times, kind of the difference here is a lot of these positions are paid, or they can be volunteer also as another, but you are actually actively doing something a little bit different than the shadowing point. And so here are two different kind of examples that you can think about is a clinical informatics specialist. And so again, the theme of our presentation is going to be concise bullet points. So you want to give the person looking at your CV, because you're really telling them a story about yourself and about your experiences, what you did in that, and what is going to be relevant for the position going forward. So what were the main skills that you did? What did you do in these positions? And how did it help frame your clinical experience is what you're going to want to think about. You're also going to want to include where you did it, as well as the dates. And like we talked about before, if it's something that's continuing and it's going to ongoing, then you can say to the present, for example, rather than having a hard end date that already finished. And so you want to communicate like what were your roles and responsibilities in this role, and then also thinking about, okay, what am I applying to? What would they want to see? What skills and responsibilities I had previously that I can bring to this new position? So that's really what we're looking at with this clinical experience here, and that is distinct from shadowing. Other points?
Yeah, I would just add in that anything that you're still presently doing, for the most part, should be in the present tense. And if it's an opportunity in the past, everything should be in the past tense.
Yeah, great. That helps communicate where you are in your journey, because you're trying to craft a story about your academic identity in your CV. And so then separately is having a section for shadowing. And the goal of this section really is to show that, hey, I have been exposed to, and I know about these different kinds of professions, or for example, types of physicians, or maybe shadowing in veterinary or something like that. And so there's kind of, depending on what kind of shadowing experiences you have, you might want to frame them differently on your CV. So for example, if you have a lot of just short, like I went and shadowed someone for a couple days here and a different person a couple days there, then you might want to group them under one clinical shadowing, with each bullet point talking about the different physicians and where they are, so that, oh, I can see, oh, this person has, they have some experience seeing what a dermatologist does, what a primary care physician does, and what gerontology is. I'm not very good at pronouncing things. And so that gives a sense of where that is. So that's kind of these short, more, oh, I shadowed these people for a few days, rather than a different kind of shadowing experience is a more singular, in-depth shadowing experience where you're still an observer. So it's different than that clinical experience where you're actively more involved in doing something. But here you can then expand in the bullet points to talk about, okay, what were who were you shadowing? So in this case, for example, like a private dental office. And then what did you do? Did you do more than just observing? And what did you watch that they did? So observed a root canal, crown placement. So what experiences have you really seen multiple times? So you might want to distinguish between those different kinds of shadowing experiences.
All right, the skills section of your CV. I remember when I was an undergraduate, and the first CV that I made, I didn't know about career centers. I made one based off a template online. It was less than a page long. The skills section was blank, and most of my work experience was outside of anything relevant to what I was applying to. So I was feeling pretty down about my CV at first. But if you stop and think about the breadth of experiences that you've had across your time, your courses here at Davidson or even beyond, if you went abroad or you did research somewhere, I think you will quickly flush out this skills section faster than you think. Skills that are of interest don't necessarily always include, skills that you think a scientist or a mathematician or whatnot might always have. Skills can also include languages that you speak, maybe coding languages, not just spoken languages. You can list model systems or model organisms that you're familiar with here. And then, of course, the actual skills that you would use in a study or an experiment. And you might even separate those across the different kinds or subfields within your discipline. So here there's a cell and molecular biology example listed here with its own bullet point. Maybe you also have experience with field work and you want to have a field skills section where you list things like being able to sample across a transect and whatnot. The skills that you list here, as Dr. Thurtle-Schmidt alluded to earlier, the rule for listing a skill here should be whether or not you feel competent enough in that skill to be able to talk about it. So if you did a PCR in a lab once 4 years ago and you were really sleepy in that lab and you don't remember much about it and you couldn't really tell people what a PCR is or when you use it, might not be the best thing to put on your CV. But we've done many of these things across many labs. By now, you've developed a lot of proficient skills and really, really relevant techniques and methodologies. And if someone asks you, do you know what gel electrophoresis is? And put it on your CV as a skill. You can talk about it. You could give maybe some details about when you used it. I think it's fine to admit that you had experience with it maybe 2 years prior and haven't used it since, but the context in which it's used and what kind of information it can yield. That's all fair game for listing skills in this section. So sit back, go over your trajectory as a student and a learner and a researcher. Think about the different things that you did across all those classes and experiences and make a list of the techniques and the skills and the machines and the methods that you used. And any of them you feel like you could talk about for a few minutes, add them to your CV. Do you have any comments to add?
One thing I just want to put on is this is kind of that idea of like having ownership and breadth of it. So one is, for example, in the software here, the Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, like having a feeling of, okay, I don't just know how to open Excel. Like maybe I know how to make graphs in Excel, do some sorting. Like you don't maybe need as far as pivot tables. Granted, that's its own kind of skill that you could put in there on its own. But something beyond, I have used like Word and Excel before, that you feel like you have some command of those programs that could bring something.
Yeah, and I'll just add in that as Davidson College students, you guys have access to LinkedIn Learning at no cost. The college pays for that on your behalf. And so think about if you have some downtime over your summer or at winter break, think about getting certified through LinkedIn Learning in Excel use or some of these other skills. And you can put that designation on your CV or resume.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so a next kind of common section is publications, presentations, and scholarly work. So this is really before we talked about research experiences you had, and now we're talking about, okay, where are places that you've communicated this research or a product to produce out. So common ones within the field of sciences are publications, and it is okay if you don't have publications. I would say 99% of undergraduates don't have publications, so don't feel like if you don't have this section that you are behind. You are not. I can tell you the day I entered graduate school, I had no publications. So just to give you a frame of reference there. But publications you'll want to have as a bullet point and give the citation. This is where something like Zotero, a citation manager, can be helpful. You can just make the formal citation in using Zotero in another program and then copy and paste that over so that it's in the correct format as people expect. You want to somehow signify your name in that list of authors. And so it's common to bold it, as in this example, or maybe underline to show so that people can easily see your name. It's most common to order publications and or presentations by date. And so we start at the top is the most recent, and then it goes like back in time as it goes down, is how I typically do it. And also for publications, you want to mostly highlight things that are already out there. If there's anything in preparation, that should be in its own separate header section within publications. You want to separate out things that have been published versus in preparation. This is kind of akin to what we were talking earlier about with if you haven't finished a class, then you put like spring 2024 or your expected graduation date, more similar, because you're giving a snapshot of right now, and right now that work is in preparation. It is not actually out there yet. Presentations too, those can include poster presentations, oral presentations, things at conferences. For example, if you presented at the Verna Miller Case Symposium here or the Summer Research Symposium here, those are all great presentations to put. And so what you're going to do is include, again, all of your name and your co-authors on there, as well as here, I would also suggest highlighting your name again. The name of your poster, and then you want to say like poster presented at or oral presentation at. So you want to indicate what kind of presentation. Poster presentation and oral presentations are usually the most common that we encounter in the sciences. Sometimes also there's what's called a conference presentation or presenting a conference paper. That's more common in math fields that you might see as well. And so you want to say the date on that. And you can also include where that was. So that gives people a sense of, okay, was this a local Davidson conference? Was it a national conference, to give different sense there? Another thing is that you can put on here, in a lot of your classes, you've had great scholarly works that you have prepared. So if you feel really proud of a lab report that is like a paper format, or for example, a portfolio or an amazing project, something that you feel fine and excited about presenting and showing to people, you can also put that scholarly work on your CV to highlight, I had a really in-depth experience here. So if you are willing to explain and share it, you can include it. And that you might want to separate by subject. So if you have something more in your sciences versus, let's say that you are really proud of some of your English works or English papers, or have a compendium of papers that you want to highlight, then you might want to separate that out by subject. But again, this is that same rule of thumb. You have to be prepared to talk about it. And it might not be always the same thing for every position you're applying to, because you're trying to kind of tell and tailor a story for whatever you're applying to here in a CV, even though CVs are much longer than resumes. But still, you have done a lot of really in-depth professional work in your courses that can be added to your scholarly works here.
I would just add in, you alluded to how to sequence within each of these categories, with the most recent being at the top. That actually, that formatting style is consistent across your whole CV, regardless of section. That you would have the thing that you're presently doing in the first position, if you will, and then things as you go back in time, kind of progressing downwards. Now, if you are currently doing a couple of things, you would actually put in the first position the thing that you started most recently. And that's not necessarily intuitive. So I just did want to draw attention to that point.
Yeah, because your idea is you're trying to draw people, okay, who am I in now? And then kind of, okay, what did I do to get me to that place? That's kind of the story you're telling within each section.
Okay, so with that, part of your story may be that you are a scholar athlete. About 25% of Davidson students are. It is a huge time commitment, and it is worth very much a valuable experience that you would want to include on your CV as well. So it really involves a lot of time commitment and responsibilities, usually involves leadership and communication and time management, amongst many other transferable skills. Again, the CV is really emphasizing those transferable skills and making them kind of come alive to the employer, or to the academic institution to which you are applying. So this is an example of a student here that was on the soccer team, and how they talked about balancing their athletic commitments with kind of a rigorous course load. And there's team leadership, there's also kind of how the team performed, and of course, balancing the time responsibilities. So it's a kind of a model for you to use. Any further comments on that one?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about using this to, for example, apply to a lab research position, like leadership and teamwork is super important in labs. So that's why this might be a really relevant and section to highlight, as well as to highlight those skills that you have in that. That's something that, for example, I know when I'm looking for research students that I really value. So those are the kind of things that you might want to bring out and can be helpful to notice and like time management from your athletic experiences.
All right, many of you have work experience, and by work experience, I mean paid experience. We'll talk about volunteering and other types of opportunities and experiences in a bit. But if you have paid positions, and those don't have to be paid positions that are necessarily exactly related to the position you're applying to. If you have work experience of any kind, you absolutely can and should list that on your CV. The example here is a math and science tutor at Davidson College, but I'll tell you from my personal experience before going to graduate school, most of my work experience was in, like, I sold children's furniture at a furniture store for a couple of years. And I also was an auditor for a mental health insurance claims company. And both of those gave me different sets of skills and required different strengths of mine. And I included both of those under work experience on my CV. If you've done a decent amount of both work at a job separate from work as a tutor or a mentor, you can separate those a little bit and have them work experience and maybe tutoring and mentoring experience, especially if you're applying to something that involves tutoring and mentoring. But in the case of any of these positions at all, you want to list where the experience took place, what your role was, tutor, for example, or insurance claims auditor for my previous example, and then a few concise bullet points of what you did. And do the people reading the CV always want to know exactly what you did? Maybe if it's a relevant job to the one you're applying for, but what they're really looking for, as you've heard us say already, is what skills you learned or what attributes were necessary for you to be successful at that job. So be sure to talk about leadership skills. Maybe you organized workshops, maybe you managed other people, maybe you took care of the financial records for the place that you were working. Whatever it would be that you did there, you want to really feature the skills that you, either soft or hard skills that you have command of while you were in that position. Anything to add from you two? Okay.
Okay, and then there is the more volunteer aspect of also that you might have. So these are leadership, community engagement, or campus involvement positions. And again, this is back to, okay, how can I distill down the relevant points of these experiences to show the skills that I have that I could bring to this next position? So what are kind of the big overarching? So again, this is similar to the work in that you don't want to say every nitty-gritty detail of things you do in these clubs or in this volunteer experience, but you want to maybe highlight major roles that you had especially. So for example, here in this lobbied for an increase, like that's something that maybe you did and felt passionate about, and shows what kind of things that you take a role in, as well as looking at, okay, here are all things that I did: developed a budget, demonstrating interest, improved scholarships. So what are different parts that kind of speak to your values, as well as that you had a major hand in? And this is where you want, again, this rule of you have to be able to talk substantially about it. So if on day one at Davidson College, you signed up to be part of like 10 different clubs, you don't want to list all those 10 different clubs if you didn't stay as a sustained active member. These are for things that you are sustained active member, that you are a leader or really have engagement, community engagement with. So that's what you kind of want to think about, that bar to put it onto your CV.
I'll add on my CV, I separate my my service and community engagement into, I have a couple of sections there. The top one is notable and ongoing service roles, and then you might see those service roles detailed in the way that you see this example is on the slide. But there's a whole bunch of things that I do that, like Dr. Thurtle-Schmidt was saying, where maybe I spent one day contributing to one other thing. And I have a second section under this header of leadership and community engagement or service, where I might say something like service to Davidson College, and every single bullet point under there is just one bullet point, very brief, the thing that you did to contribute to the community here at Davidson College. Maybe you didn't play a leadership role, or you only did it one or a few times, and it doesn't necessarily warrant a big prominent spot on your CV, but you do want to mention it because it's something that you did, and it's your time. You can do that in a really shorter framework. Maybe, like I said, service to Davidson College as a bottom section in this overall leadership and community engagement section, where you just detail one bullet point that lists what it is, and you don't give a bunch of additional information with nested bullet points about it there. So if you have a lot of things that you've contributed to and you just didn't do a lot of those things in depth, you can still mention them, but you don't want to give them all this kind of space on your CV. Your CV will be way too long.
And kind of similarly, so this is really analogous to when we were talking about the shadowing experiences. If you had an in-depth shadowing experience, that had the more like big bullet points like this, whereas then those kind of more quick shadowing experiences each had their own bullet point. That's what Dr. Vogumar is talking about separating them out. So you can do something really akin in this section of your CV as well.
And I think it's important to keep in mind as you're putting your CV together, that consistency in your participation goes a long way. That graduate school programs, med schools, research institutions, they like to see that you have spent some time consistently with an organization, that you haven't done, a few months, a semester here, a semester there, but that you stuck with organizations and ideally have grown in that organization into a leadership role by the end of your academic career at Davidson. Okay. Next section.
Then you also might have professional affiliations or development. So this can be two different things. For example, this is just a really quick bullet point. I'm a member of this professional society, for example. So that can give kind of a snapshot of what things that you have been involved in. And then this is also where we talk about certifications. And so maybe you are EMT certified and you want to put that on this would be a great place for example, certifications or other professional developments. This is another place also where we talked about before, those LinkedIn learning certifications. This might be a good place for those to go as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. And the Matthews Center, just as a quick plug, and does have professional development funding for students. So, there are hundreds of societies across different disease groups, different developmental, all different kinds of areas of study. There are often heavily discounted student memberships. So seriously consider, if you are interested in, say, neuroscience, for example, or genetics, look into the student organization. And if you need financial assistance and paying that membership due fee, you can consider tapping into the professional development funding at the Matthews Center, which you can find on Handshake Resources. All right, and key points.
Yeah, so kind of big key points that we're thinking about is keeping things concise, write in bullet points. Think about your context, scope, and impact. So how can I communicate what was the impact that I had in this role, and what is something that I could bring into my next role? That's really what you're trying to communicate with your CV. And using your bullet points to make points specific. You don't want things that are too long. You don't want people's eyes to glaze over with too many lines of text. Keep things short and snappy, but by communicating the main impact that you had. Be really clear on when you did these things. Don't be vague, and don't have large blocks of text, for example.
I think the blank space in a CV, how you arrange it, how you format it, whether you have breaks in between sections, the indents that you have maybe between a header and the bullet points underneath it, all of those arrangements and that blank space in a CV can actually make the CV much more readable and approachable. Imagine if you received a CV that was just no spaces at all and a bunch of bullet points and lines, one right after the other. It would be really hard to search for a specific section that you were looking for, and you probably would just do a quick glance down the page and then move on to the next CV. Formatting is so important. And on that note, there are thousands of CV templates that you can download offline that can get you started. You can look for one that's arranged in a way that you find maybe a little pleasing, or that you yourself just feels speaks to the way that you want your CV to look. Download that template and then just start filling it in. You don't have to start from scratch. And you want to make sure the formatting is consistent and used with indents. It's really easy to open up a Google Doc or a Word document, for example, and you want an indent. And so you start hitting the tab button over and over maybe, or some space bars, and you're trying to indent things and make them look nested and arranged well. But doing it that way actually isn't very consistent. The next line down, you're going to have to hit space and tab a whole bunch as well. And there are templates for CVs that you can download that have those indents already sort of formatted into the page for you using the actual indent tool in Word or in Google Docs. So make sure that you're formatting, that you pay just as much attention to your formatting as you do the content of your CV. Probably the person who you're applying to is reading through dozens, potentially hundreds of these CVs. You want to make this information as easy as possible for them to get out of your CV.
Yep. And I would say I would make a big plug for the templates that we have on Handshake under resources, put in resume, and you'll see templates come up. You would just add the additional sections that the CV has, and of course, expand out. But those templates have all that formatting built in. We would strongly advise against having any kind of pictures on your resume. Our students have had success with our templates and landing opportunities. So again, we just really would encourage the use of those options. One note to mention: if there are any typos on your CV, it can be the cause of immediate disqualification, because as a scientist, your detail orientedness matters, and so we want to make sure that you don't have any errors on any typos, any formatting inconsistencies. Those are really important to really scrub out for.
And also kind of this point here, order sections according to the opportunity you are applying for. So don't put things just in this order because we put it in this presentation in this order. These are just examples of different sections. You really want to think about, because you are trying to craft a story about yourself and present yourself to this position. So you need to think about, okay, is clinical and shadowing experience as important to this position? If it's not, then that should go down lower, and maybe like research experience is more important, or vice versa, for example. Or maybe this is more of a teaching opportunity, and so you want to put up higher your teaching and mentoring experiences that you've had. So you are not necessarily going to have one single CV. You'll have one single CV, but you'll probably want to switch some of those things around, and maybe also emphasize different skills from those experiences depending on the opportunity.
Exactly.
I'll add one important caveat and have you learn from my mistakes. And that is to start your CV early on in your undergraduate years and add to it periodically as you progress through your time here at Davidson. At one point, I had a CV and I just didn't open it because I had a job and, I was here at Davidson actually, and didn't add anything for over 2 years. And then suddenly had to update my CV and go back through time and emails and try and figure out what was I doing and where was I doing it and when did I do it and what did I learn and don't do that to yourself. Maybe once every few months, you open up your CV and update it with everything that went on that semester, or maybe you're more diligent than that and you do it weekly or biweekly. But my advice would be to go to the Matthews Center early on in your first year here at Davidson, start your CV template, and then add to it as you go. When the time comes for you to apply to places, or maybe an opportunity suddenly presents itself, you don't want to start with a blank piece of paper and go through your life experiences then. So start early.
Absolutely. And with that, the Matthews Center is here to help you. We provide one-on-one advising, and also you can see us Monday through Friday in a drop-in setting too. So you don't even have to have a scheduled appointment. You can just show up. If you want specific help on with a science perspective, I would encourage you to come to my office, my drop-in hours, which are Thursday mornings, 9:15 to 1. But that can change. So just consult the schedule on the Matthews Center homepage of the website, which lays out everyone's schedule. And we can do, in addition to CV assistance, we can also help you figure out what internships or job opportunities you might like to apply for, and help you in reviewing essays for those, or and interview prep and doing mock interviews, and giving you grad school information, helping you sort through potential different opportunities that you might have. So again, we are located in the Union. We're right across from the post office. There are drop-in hours Monday through Friday. And then of course you could book that one-on-one individualized half-hour appointment on Handshake by selecting the appointments tab. Thank you so much. Thank you, professors, for your assistance and time today and walking us through this very detailed CV workshop. We hope, students, that you find it helpful. Please, please come see us. We want to help you. We want your CV to be the absolute best it can be, because when it is fantastic, it really opens doors and opportunities for you. Thank you.